Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this IANA webinar, FMCSA Update with Deputy Administrator Jim Mullen. I'm extremely pleased to be able to bring the Acting Administrator to spend some time with us today. It's a great treat. Obviously, he's an extremely busy fellow, a heck of a lot going on down at the agency, but he's been kind enough to block some time for us, so we're extremely lucky to have him and very much appreciative. So a little bit of an introduction for our guest. Jim Mullen is the Deputy Administrator of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, or FMCSA, as we all like to probably refer to it. He's responsible for providing executive leadership and expert guidance on policy matters, legislative initiatives, regulatory implementation, communications, and stakeholder and congressional relations, all with a focus on helping the FMCSA further its safety mission. I think it's important to just interject. Above all, the FMCSA is a safety organization with that at its core. The agency that he leads regulates more than 530,000 trucking companies, 12,000 bus and motor carrier, motor coach operators, and approximately 4 million interstate commercial driver's license holders. Obviously, at the core of Intermodal. A little bit of background on Administrator Mullen. Jim brings an extensive portfolio of experience in providing senior leadership in the law arena, with the vast majority of that occurring in the truck. Prior to launching his own consulting firm in 2016, Jim served for more than a decade as the Executive Vice President and General Counsel for Werner Transport, one of the 5 largest trucking companies in the United States, and obviously a member of IANA. His professional background also includes expertise in the areas of government relations and human resources. Of special note, he's a proud Nebraska Cornhusker, and Jim obtained his law degree and his undergraduate degrees from the University of Nebraska. So he's not kidding around when he says he's a Cornhusker. Without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Jim. Jim, thanks so much for being here. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Val. Appreciate your comments. I especially would like to highlight what you said during the intro about FMCSA's core function is a safety regulatory body, and reducing fatalities and serious injuries involving large trucks and buses is our core mission and our top priority on a daily basis. So thank you for highlighting that. On behalf of Secretary Elaine Chao and the entire FMCSA team, thank you for allowing me to join you this afternoon for this discussion. We've had a long-standing relationship with IANA. You folks have been a friend and a safety partner with FMCSA for a long time, and we thank you for your collaboration and look forward to continued collaboration in the future on furthering our core mission of highway safety for large trucks. I'd like to essentially say this in all talks and conversations and speeches I give these days, because it can't be said enough. I want to express our sincere appreciation for the extraordinary efforts of our nation's truck drivers and everyone involved in the motor carrier industry during the ongoing coronavirus outbreak. I obviously know a fair number of folks in the industry, and I know that it's not just drivers that are out there doing it. Most logistics trucking companies I talk to, they have most of their folks office working in accordance with, of course, distancing guidelines, and without the entire industry, our supply chain would have collapsed, and this pandemic would have been a heck of a lot worse than it already is. So our gratitude to everyone in the industry. As Secretary Chao has said, and I often echo this, truck drivers are American heroes. Those of us in the industry, or those of us who have been in the industry, have always recognized the day-to-day contributions that truck drivers make to our country on a day-to-day basis. Unfortunately, it took a pandemic to really get folks to understand that, and I certainly hope that that appreciation continues even as our country emerges from this pandemic and we get back to normalcy. As President Trump has said, thank God for truckers. During this pandemic, the DOT has taken unprecedented actions to help support that industry, the motor carrier industry, and ensure that we maintain the nation's supply chain during this crisis. The beginning of this pandemic was controlled chaos, I would say, essentially within FMCSA trying to respond to the pandemic and the different needs in the regulated community to allow them to continue to do their work on a day-to-day basis. As you know, we issued our first ever nationwide emergency hours of service declaration, and that offered regulatory relief for motor carriers delivering needed emergency supply goods throughout the country. So obviously, medical supplies to hospitals and healthcare providers, food, early on fuel, although we all know that fuel demand declined after the initial onslaught. Simple things, well, I say simple things, things we took for granted before being on grocery store shelves, all of a sudden were no longer available due to hoarding and surge buying. And so the industry really stepped up to provide for those services and those needs. And that declaration hopefully provided them with some relief as the drivers continue to deliver goods throughout the country. We've taken other actions, as you all know, on CDLs. We extended CDL termination expirations. On CLPs, we did a few things. We tried to simplify and remove some regulatory obstacles on onboarding with CLP processes. We permitted CLP holders who have passed their skills test but yet had not received the credentialing from the state licensing agency to operate the CMV even without the CDL holder in the jump seat. He or she could be in the sleeper berth. Medical certificates, we extended the expiration of medical certificates so that the industry could continue to operate in light of DMV closures, medical providers, health clinics not wanting to have DOT medical exams in their offices and clinics during the pandemic. And so we took measures essentially everywhere that we could to provide the needed relief, but yet without jeopardizing or compromising the safety of the motoring public and the driver, professional driver, him or herself. And that's critical that we did not jeopardize safety during that period of time. We have the expirations of a couple of those things coming up. As you may know, the hours of service emergency declaration expires on June 14th. We're monitoring that very closely, as we have all along, as to whether there will or will not be an extension on that. And don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but I would say that a good segment of the industry probably no longer needs that. There may be some sectors of the industry that might continue to need that. But again, we analyze that and we welcome, we need feedback from the industry. And so if you have any feedback on that, we're all ears. Those waivers on CDLs, CLPs, and medical certificates, those expire on June 30th. And again, we continue to monitor that, not only with the regulated community, but also with other stakeholders, state DMVs, and the like, and trying to gather intel on whether an extension of that is going to be necessary or any of those three items is going to be necessary. And as you all know, we have a very diversified regulated community in the truck space. And so there's rarely unanimity on topics of this magnitude and significance, but we are listening to all and analyzing it from every angle. So thank you for all of your information and feedback in the past and on a go-forward basis. Some other things that the agency did during the pandemic, of course, is we monitored the status of rest stops, truck stops, truck parking. We were actively engaged on the state level to ensuring that the rest areas remained open. A few states even offered truck parking at their way stations, and that was very helpful. The truck stops, the private truck stops had issues with local restrictions on capacity. We worked as best as we could with those local authorities and to make sure that the truck stops, private truck stops, were considered essential employees under the Department of Homeland Security's guidelines. And so we were very involved in that process, and we're happy to help out at the private truck stops. Recently, we partnered with FEMA and state partners to help distribute 1 million protective face coverings to truckers across the country. You may have seen some of the media reports. We targeted 8 states, I believe it was eight states, to assist with the distribution of the mask, and various association and other industry stakeholders in distributing those masks. It appears as if we are going to be able to distribute an additional just over 2.2 million masks, I believe, to truck and bus drivers across the country. Hopefully, it sounds like, I think I saw confirmation today that the first distribution of masks are starting to go out to the regulated community, and we've expanded the method by which we're distributing those masks. I'm not going to bore you with all the details, but we've expanded it other than just with our state partners. So we're hoping this effort not only, of course, shows our appreciation for the work of our professional drivers, but also keeps themselves and others safe as they continue to operate and deliver our nation's freight on a daily basis. We're very thankful for all our stakeholders like IANA who have supported these emergency actions and help us get the word out to the industry and the drivers that you all represent. That's been very helpful. Again, as you know, with a very diversified industry, it's sometimes hard to get information out to everybody who needs to know. And so thank you for all your efforts. So that's kind of a nutshell what I wanted to cover as it relates to COVID specific items that the agency has undertaken. Another top item that I want to talk about briefly, and as you all know, the FMCSA announced their new final rule on the modifications to the hours of service regulations. We've been told that the Federal Register will publish that on June 1, which I believe means that the effective date is September 30. I don't have it in front of me. I think that's the right math. This is 120 days. So we're very, very bullish on the hours of service modifications and the beneficial impact they will have on highway safety involving large trucks and buses. The rulemaking is the result of years, and as you know, it has been years, to listening to all of the agency stakeholders, whether it's the motor carrier industry, professional drivers, safety advocates, law enforcement, state partners. The administration heard the concerns of all these interested parties, and we've acted. During this process, we received over 8,000 public comments. We carefully reviewed the feedback to craft these updates to the existing rules, which again, we believe not only provide truck drivers added flexibility to their lives, but maintains or improves safety of the nation's roadways. At the little risk of being somewhat redundant of what you probably all know, I'm going to cover real quickly the 4 key provisions to the hours of service rules. First, the agency provides flexibility for the 30-minute rest break. As you know, under the existing rule, that 30-minute rest break has to be off duty. The modification will allow that 30-minute to be on duty, not driving as well. And the rest break doesn't kick in until after the 8th hour of consecutive driving or 8th hour without taking a 30-minute rest break. So we believe that flexibility is going to grant greater control to the driver so that he or she can determine when they ought to take that break and what that break ought to look like. Again, the important part of the 30-minute rest break in general is to get time off task, is the phrase. In other words, time off of the task of driving the commercial motor vehicle. And so things like unloading, loading, paperwork, fueling, that allows for the time off tasks and refocuses the driver on the driving task when he or she gets back behind the wheel. Again, as you know, that we've modified the sleeper berth exception to allow drivers to split that 10-hour required off-duty resets into an 8-2 or a 7-3 split. And neither of these periods now count against the driver's 14-hour window. We believe that flexibility will permit the driver who's best suited to make that decision when they are fatigued or when they are suitable for driving. So we believe that's going to assist as well. Not a huge modification, but we did change the adverse driving conditions exception by extending the 2 hours on the 14-hour clock. As you know, they already had the 2 hours on the 11-hour clock. So this hour goes 14 to 16 on the 14-hour rule. And then lastly, we changed the short haul exception available to certain drivers by lengthening the maximum on-duty period from 12 to 14 hours and extending the distance limit within which the driver can operate from 100 air radius miles to 150 air radius miles. Again, all of these changes were based directly on the feedback from the thousands of public comments we received during the rulemaking process and through the very I think it was seven listening sessions we held around the country as a result of the ANPRM and the NPRM process. So we took this task, this charge, extremely seriously. The data dictated what we did. The FMCSA career staff was extremely diligent in their work, but yet we got through this process, I wouldn't say record speed, but 2-year turnaround on an ANPRM, NPRM, and a final rule, really on 5 different rule changes. Like we keep calling it one, but really it's 5 different rule changes. That's significant. And kudos to the career folks at FMCSA who accomplished this task. We know that not everybody in the regulated community or stakeholders in general are satisfied with the 4 provisions. We know that some wanted the 5th on the 3-hour pause. We know that some didn't care for, say, the short haul extension. And we know that some wanted greater flexibility on the sleeper berth. We know that some wanted a complete elimination of the 30-minute rest break. But again, relying on the data and the input, we definitely feel that the path that the agency took is the right path, and it's the safe path. Aside from the safety benefits, obviously this rule, these updates provide regulatory relief. They will assist the motor carrier industry by providing over $270 million annually in critical regulatory savings. We believe that will play a part in recovery, not only for the nation, but specifically for the motor vehicle industry, commercial motor vehicle industry during the recovery and rebound from this pandemic. And again, I talked about that 120-day implementation period. We worked with ELD vendors on the time frame necessary to reprogram the ELDs so that their customers can take advantage of the modifications. And based on feedback, we felt that 120-day implementation period made the most sense. We know there's still more work to do, and my suspicion is during Q&A, there'll be questions about that, so I'll leave it to that, and we'll see where the discussion goes. But we certainly want to learn more about the challenges that you folks, your membership, are facing, and what assistance you need from the federal government and the FMCSA specifically that we can do to support. I said it before, we said it before, we recognize that solutions to those challenges, specifically in the motor carrier industry, don't really come from Washington, D.C., they come from you folks. And that's not a knock on the folks in D.C. It's absolutely a fact, however, that the men and women that are performing these functions on a day-to-day basis in the field, their skin's in the game. They know what works, they know what doesn't work. And so we have to rely upon you folks in large part in our decision making. Last thing I want to remind folks of is, roadway safety remains our top priority. And so we please stress with your members that we need all drivers to drive safely, follow the laws, keep within the speed limit, especially during these times. I've spent a number of trips on I-95 north and south down to South Carolina and back over the last 90 days. And most folks are driving safely, but you have some folks out there that think with decreased enforcement activity and the pandemic that it's the Autobahn. And we're getting reports now that although VMT is down, and I'm not talking just CMVs, but although VMT is down, accident frequency is not down at the same clip. In fact, the rate is up compared to VMT. That's not good. And so our request is that you remind your folks in your community to please continue to drive safely. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Hal, for any questions your folks may have.
First and foremost, thank you, Administrator Mullen. That was really terrific information, and we really appreciate you kind of diving a little bit deeper into the activities of the agency and what the key features you've been working on during this extremely busy time. Even if there wasn't a pandemic, you guys have been working really hard on a number of issues. So obviously, throwing in all these emergency moves that you guys have had to make has been pretty impressive to see how nimble you guys have responded. So on behalf of everybody, I think everybody really appreciates that. We've got a bunch of questions rolling in. I'm gonna kind of take the bully pulpit since I've got the microphone and ask a couple of selfish questions because I'm just curious. The first would be, do you have any updates on the status of IANA's exemption application regarding the qualified inspector and brake inspectors on intermodal chassis?
Yeah, as you know, the comment period has come and gone and received a number of favorable responses. your friends at ATA and Rail Association, they responded in support. So we're now in the process of drafting a response. You know the drill. We can't get ahead of ourselves. What's going to happen and when it's going to happen, but I can tell you it's in the drafting stage at this point.
Terrific. And then I was also going to ask if you could give us a similar update on the IANA's 90-day waiver request for the annual inspection of intermodal chassis, kind of related to this COVID situation.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that to our attention. Like some of these other waivers I spoke about, you know, it takes the industry to make us aware of some of these challenges you folks have. So that also is in the drafting stage. All of these, something I'll just kind of touch on briefly. You know, these waivers that we kicked out, not only does FMCSA do the drafting and deliberation, gets them to the Secretary's office, and her team has to do their diligence, and then we send it over to OMB, and OMB in the White House analyze basically every COVID-related issue of significance. And I would say, I've only been in the government for just short of 2 years now. I was in this industry for a while. Without minimizing what the DOT and the agency does on a day-to-day basis, I think I've seen the best of government. In any event, that's a long-winded way of saying it's in the process, but kudos to folks in the process that expedite these types of things the best they can.
Yeah, outstanding. Thank you, sir. Here's one sort of a kind of a big picture. Could you talk just a little bit about the agency's research priorities?
Yeah. So again, with the core mission being reduction of accidents, fatalities, the crash causation study is something that we are analyzing. As you know, we did a request for information from stakeholders as to things they think would be critical to any sort of causal crash study. So that's the top priority. It's going to take some cooperation from Congress to fund this. Like most government agencies, our budget is very tight. And so it'll take some assistance from Capitol Hill to get us the necessary funding for that study, for it to be robust enough to be meaningful. So, but that's an issue we're looking at. Anything really ADAS, the advanced driver assist systems, we're paying particular attention to that. Not so much as to, this perhaps not the trucking industry, but the tech industry, the race to autonomous. Not so much that'll take place when that takes place, but these safety technologies, whether it's emergency braking, collision mitigation, adaptive cruise control, all those things. We're partnering with the regulated community and manufacturers to make sure that we're doing our part to help support that and to get the word out where necessary on to help proliferate those technologies that have proven to be helpful on safety. So those are the two main top items. There are others, but that's where our focus is.
That's great. And that actually rolls right into another question that we had. And you really answered a lot of it. It was around telemetric solution providers and the FMC agenda. I guess the only other part of that question is there a contact person or a reference point at the agency if folks want to get in contact with the agency on issues surrounding technology and safety?
Yeah, Jack would. I don't know if Jack has speaking. I don't know if he can spit. I'd say Jack Van Steenberg would be the focal point for that, and then Jack can feed it to the appropriate folks. Ken Riddle currently runs our research division, but I think I just sent it to Jack, and he can filter to the appropriate individuals.
Here's one on hours of service, just to kind of to touch on it again. The core principle of hours of service change is to improve safety, but there are a number of references throughout the final rule referring to driver optimization and transportation productivity and efficiency. Are there any of those potential productivity gains and efficiency enhancements that kind of jump out in terms of the changes to the hours of service rules that'll help the U.S. Freight handling capacity?
I'd say the one that, and again, that's not our core focus, but that's part of the analysis that has to be in any rulemaking. But I would say that the one that is probably the most meaningful is that 30-minute rest break modification to allow it to be on duty, not driving. It makes the driver's day more productive, but yet maintains the safety benefit of the time off task. So yeah, I'd say that's the main one. There was a lot of discussion during the rulemaking process over the last year and a half on what this might do to DMT and productivity. Again, not really our space, but our analysis is that 30-minute rest break will provide the most meaningful productivity. The short haul, I'll be honest with you, on the short haul, we didn't get as robust of feedback as we were hoping to get. That's not criticism. I think it is what it is, on how carriers could take advantage of the expansion from 1 to 150 and 12 to 14. But that would be probably the next area that would have the most meaningful operational or productivity benefits from our point of view. But again, the industry will analyze, and they'll tell us after the rules become effective and they get some time to analyze that. But those are the two main areas from our perspective. We saw some likelihood of improvement in those areas.
Super. Here's a question about, is the agency looking to expand any of the crash accountability items that are not deemed driver fault in the future?
Right. So we just expanded that. Boy, Jack, about a month ago that the new preventability program went live. I think it's now 16 different criteria on the preventability analysis. And I should know, but I think there's even kind of a catch-all, even if it doesn't fall within the 16 specific. So I don't know that we have anything in the hopper in the near future on expanding that yet again. But I would say one of the things we're working on right now, as you probably all know, is the CSA program and the recommendation from the National Academy of Sciences to implement, or at least consider, the item response theory, IRT. And so that has caused us to reevaluate CSA and see what possibilities IRT hold for the agency and the regulated community. And in that, is we're looking at things such as the different basics, and the crash basic being one of them, in ways that we can address some of the criticism or problems with the current CSA system. And so, maybe more to come on that. But again, specifically, any other areas on the crash preventability, any other criteria, probably nothing in the short term.
Great. Could you give us the current status of any research or regulatory activity on underride guards on the train?
Yeah, so that's something we're looking at, and have been for some time. And it's not just FMCSA. NHTSA has regulatory authorities on this issue. In fact, I'm not passing the buck to NHTSA, but they have the lion's share of the regulatory authorities on side guards, underrides. So yeah, we continue to evaluate that. There was a report that came out recently that we were involved in, so to speak, on side guards for pedestrian and bicyclists. And so it's an ongoing analysis. Yeah, we just continue to work on it. And as we all know, there's some activity on Capitol Hill on this issue as well. So we continue to evaluate and monitor the situation.
Great, thanks. Here's a question. Has there been any conversations about moving away from paper BIT FMCSA inspections in favor of moving towards an electronic version?
Yeah, I'm not sure I have an answer to that one. Jack, do you have any sort of response to that one?
Yeah, Hal, you're just so I understand your question. Eliminate the paper inspections and go totally electronic. Is that what your question is?
I think that's the direction that they're going in. Is there any move towards moving those inspections to electronic? Yeah.
So the vast majority of the inspections we get are electronic now. However, in real life, what you do see is inspectors walking around with the inspection form on their clipboard and then entering their computer. But for the most part, all the inspections we get are electronic, and they come in from the states into our MICMA system. However, we just went out on a proposal to modernize our inspection program, integrated inspection modernization system, and there's a active proposal out there right now. Our internal inspection processor, our system, Aspen, we've been using that for 20-something years, and it's just not up to times. And we finally went out the proposal, and we'll hopefully have a new inspection IT system in place in the next year or so.
Okay, great. Thank you. Here's one with intermodal by definition being a multimodal business. How does FMCSA interact with the other DOT and regulatory agencies on intermodal related issues?
Well, so obviously rail, FRA, we work with them on common issues. So I guess I'm not sure if there are any items specifically in mind, but obviously we communicate with them regularly. Even with MARAD, we communicate with MARAD on intermodal ADS equipped vehicles at the ports. Of course, NHTSA is involved in that as well. So I think we have open dialogue amongst the different modes within the DOT involving intermodal issues. If you have some areas where you think that we could be doing more, I'm happy to involve the other modes in those discussions. But yeah, we meet weekly and talk about all issues, but certainly those which are common amongst us. We have opportunities to talk about those regularly.
Great. Here's a question, and I'm going to try to do it justice. He's interested in what the agency has learned about the regulatory history of 49 CFR 371.3, the records kept by brokers. Since the subject has been in the press a lot recently, he's curious if the agency's learned anything from that regulatory history.
I'm not sure exactly how to interpret the question. If we've learned anything about the legislative history, I guess I would say I haven't had a time to fully analyze the legislative report when that statute was first enacted. So our particular regulation 371.3 that came from the ICC, then of course highways, and then FMCSA. It has a history of not being actively, I don't want to say enforced. I don't think it's been a issue of common complaint over the years. Now, I will also preface that with, as you probably all know, it's a hot topic right now. And there were protesters here in DC, and the president has spoken on some of these issues. And so the vast number of complaints that we have about the freight brokerage space and the rates right now aren't relative to the transparency of 371.3. In fact, I'll tell you, we don't have a specific complaint that a broker failed to abide by 371.3 in a situation in which the motor carrier hadn't waived contractually the ability to get that financial data that the regulation encompasses. So I've worked very closely personally with OIDA, some of the protesters and others from this, I guess, called the independent operator types. Get us one, and then we can act and we can address some of the other issues related to that. Mm-hmm. Don't have a single one. Now they of course want OIDA pass petition for rulemaking from FMCSA by the FMCSA to prohibit that contractual waiver. That's under deliberation. And step one of that deliberation is, do we even have the statutory authorities to do such? Expect perhaps a notice and comment on their petition. So it's under, we're following it very closely. And but I can't state enough that we don't have a specific violation in front of us on 371.3 in spite of essentially asking for it. I'm not sure, but the question may have also been I believe that when the reg was promulgated, that the whole process was different, that motor carriers paid the brokers directly versus the shipper paying the brokers. And so there's some perhaps difference of opinions as to what the net effect of that regulation was intended to be, but I'll save that debate for a different time. But we're looking at the situation very closely, and probably we don't expect this one to go away anytime soon. And we take our regulatory obligations very seriously. But again, I guess I'm being extremely repetitive now. We don't have a specific complaint of 371.3 in front of us.
Right. Great. Thank you. That's really good information. It's really difficult to act on things that you don't have. Here's a question about intermodal equipment providers. What has the agency been doing regarding intermodal equipment provider reviews, and what have the results been? And then I guess following on from that, what are the plans going forward for that?
Jack might be able to address that a little better than I am. But I do know we've seen our out of service rates go down, and the IEPs, generally speaking, compliant. And what do we do, Jack? 8 or so of these reviews a year. Is that fair?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you have anything additional to add on this topic?
Sure. What we do, and most of the people know this, though, for the most part, when we're coming. We ask a lot of pre-questions before we go to the ports and start these reviews. And what we're doing is looking at the trucks leaving the ports and inspecting the trucks. And we want to make sure that the trucks you're using, the trucks that are carrying your chassis and your container, are safe and in good operating condition. And that's what we want to see. And that's one of the things that we've always pushed. Make sure you use trucking companies that don't have bad safety rating, an unsatisfactory rating or so forth. Do your due diligence there. One of the things that we want to make sure is that the chassis are ready to go. We don't want the truck driver to hook up to a chassis and have to go to a rotability line to change a flat tire or put a light in. We want that trucker to come in, pick up the chassis, and be able to leave. And that's one of the things that we're going to be stressing. Where we are this year, obviously, we've been delayed because of social distancing. We just started a policy on high-risk off-site focused investigations, and we're incrementally addressing some of our priorities. We have to, by congressional mandate, we have to do high-risk carriers. We have to do motor coach carriers. So we're incrementally addressing those congressional mandates. We're going to, next week, we're going to start addressing new entrant safety audits, hazmat, and then we'll get into the intermodal. But, again, the encouragement is use good, safe carriers. Make sure you have that inspection program, a systematic inspection program to get these chassis out of the yards. So, thanks.
That's really helpful. Thank you to both of you. I've got a couple more that I want to squeeze in here, because I think they kind of wrap this up well. The first being, what are the most significant challenges the agency sees with respect to safety?
Bad driving, bad decision making. I started off, and I was responsible for the safety department of a company that had 10,000 drivers and had the ability to analyze causes of crashes and involved in litigation, of course, on the legal side. I was driving on I-95 a couple of days ago, and I had a truck. I couldn't see the bottom of the truck in my rearview mirror. You can't see the bottom of a truck behind you going 75 miles an hour on the interstate in your rearview mirror. That's a big problem. So it's just stuff like that. And I know that oversimplifies things, but bad driving. And I didn't know how to eradicate it when I was entirely when I was, quote, in charge of 10,000 drivers. And I don't know how to completely eradicate that as the deputy administrator of FMCSA. An example of that, and I won't name the port, but there was a lane coming out of a port that had an extremely high accident frequency. And so law enforcement collaborated with industry, with the federal government, and did traffic study analysis. And I won't remember the exact timing, but the following distance of these intermodal trucks coming out of the port was scary close. And so they heightened enforcement on that. And lo and behold, accident frequency declined precipitously in a hurry once folks knew that that particular state law enforcement was dead serious about following distances. So I guess the answer is, some might think heightened enforcement. Is that the end all be all? I don't think so personally. Regulatory modifications such as hours of service, I think will go towards improving highway safety. I think technology advancements obviously are going to help improve highway safety. But at the end of the day, I'm not criticizing. I always said this since I've been involved in this industry, is at the end of the day, it's the men and the women behind the wheel operating that 80,000-pound vehicle that have the greatest input on what the outcomes are. And we really need to try to get folks to drive smarter, to drive safer. And we want to do everything we can within our power to assist and support the regulated community on how to achieve that end. Again, whether it's through regulatory change, whether it's through collaboration, outreach, those types of things. We had a truck safety summit scheduled here in DC for, I think it was March 18th or whatever it was, to talk about best practices, talk about how all stakeholders together could come up with ideas, best practices. But that got canceled, of course, through the pandemic, and we're going to reschedule as soon as things return to normalcy. But I know I'm rambling a little bit, but to me, it is almost as simple as that, along with how can we all assist that driver in being safer. I don't know if that really addresses your question, Al, but those are my thoughts on it.
Well, not only does it address the question, but it actually addressed the next question, because my next question was literally going to be, what can the intermodal industry do to help the agency safety mission? And I think you summed it up really well. Do what you do, right? If you are a maintenance and repair vendor, do a good job. Take pride in your work and check it. You know, if you're an intermodal equipment provider, step in there and make sure that it's the best quality equipment that's going out the gate. And if you're a motor carrier, make sure your drivers are driving safely. I think
that's spot on.
Really,
and you know, generally, and I don't want to besmirch those who aren't members of IANA or OIDA or ATA or a state association, but if you look at our data, generally those folks aren't the high-risk carriers. So obviously that's where we spend a good chunk of our time and resources, is on the high-risk carriers. And we're looking at ways, and we've seen some positive results in some states that have already started to implement this type of collaborative process, where on a voluntary basis, the state law enforcement, our folks on the state level, our state administrators, our division administrators, and state motor carrier associations will put on a all-day, whatever you want to call it, a seminar, a conference, symposium on best practices, and we can show the motor carriers who don't have, quote, stellar records that are willing to participate. And we've seen some robust participation. A lot of those folks really want to get better at it. And we're trying to do collaborative efforts, not just us, but others, including your membership, on assisting those who might be struggling a little bit on the safety side. So again, I kind of get back to, you can't regulate bad decisions across the board, but the more we can do collaboratively to educate, the better off we're all going to be.
That's a great point to put on this. Just thank you so much for spending the time with us. It's been great. Got a lot of great comments already. A lot of great questions were generated from the discussion. So I really appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy schedules to spend with us. And I appreciate Jack Van Steenberg, the Chief Safety Officer, to be able to join us as well and backstop some of those questions. Really important. If folks have other questions for the administrator or Jack, please pass them on to us. You can send them directly to me, hal@intermodal.org. We just want to thank all of our year-long sponsors for the great work that they do and in making things like this possible. And with that, again, I will extend my thanks to the administrator and Jack for sharing their time with us today. We look forward to having you back in the future, hopefully face-to-face, and able to carry on this great conversation. But with that, I will say thank you to everybody for their time, and please remember to stay safe.